Okay, looks like we're good to go. So I'm going to start us in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the BadgerBlitz.com podcast. This is John Veldhuis, senior writer for BadgerBlitz.com, joined once again by John McNamara, the publisher of BadgerBlitz.com. We're going to kind of dive right into things again today. We are talking on Tuesday night, I guess you could call it National Signing Day Eve or Early Signing Day Eve. I mean, this is a kind of a second year that the college prospects can sign their national letters of intent early and officially join the programs. Badgers are expecting to sign quite a few really standout players in this cycle. And John, you put up an article on the site today that was called "Wisconsin is going to sign its best class of the Rivals.com era." Obviously, hard to dispute that with the kind of headliners that we'll talk about a little bit here when we get into the show a little bit more. But how do you think the Badgers were able to assemble this class? That really, I mean, it stacks up. Not only with some of the other recruiting classes across college football, but to really take a step forward compared to what you would usually expect from a Wisconsin recruiting class. How does it stand out to you?
Yeah, I think if you look at this class and the two big headliners, Logan Brown and Graham Mertz, one, it's awfully impressive that they landed their commitments, and it's even more impressive that they're out of state guys. If you look back at the top guys that Wisconsin's gotten past recruiting classes, oftentimes they're from inside the state, and they're able to keep top talent from inside the state. Wisconsin did that this year, but they also added, those two big pieces in Graham Mertz and Logan Brown that we talked about. With both, Wisconsin was there from the very beginning. I remember back in Logan Brown's recruitment and going to Wisconsin's camp. I think it was in the summer of 2016, right after his freshman year. And, there's, 200, 300 kids there. And, Logan Brown stood out, and I was kind of hunting around and trying to find out, who this kid was. And I eventually found his mom there and one of his high school coaches. And I was really surprised when they told me, yeah, this kid is, just coming off his freshman year of high school. So, that camp kind of kicked things off for him recruiting wise. He hit it off with Joe Rudolph, and that started a really strong relationship. And obviously Wisconsin beat out some of the top schools in the country in his recruitment. And then, it was the same thing with Graham Mertz, who they also got on campus to camp. At the time of his commitment, he just had offers from Minnesota and Kansas. So, with those two guys in particular, and the two guys who are at the top of this class, it was laying that groundwork early and then being able to hold off other schools, throughout their recruitment. So I credit the Wisconsin coaching staff for identifying those guys early, not just Mertz and Logan Brown, but, other guys in this recruiting class who they were on pretty early. So I think the staff has strong evaluators on it, and they did a good job of identifying guys early, laying that groundwork, and then, fending off other schools from across the country who wanted to come in and try to flip those guys.
I think that's the thing that stands out the most to me about the Badgers signing this class is having able to not only doing a good job in getting those relationships going with guys like Brown and Mertz, but to fend off really strong recruiting pushes from guys, specifically Mertz. I'm thinking of, because he was obviously he's a guy that kind of tore up the high school camps and kind of scouting, high profile scouting things and things like that. I mean, he really got on a roll after committing to the Badgers, and was really getting some interest from some of the real heavy hitters in the world of college football. And I think it was interesting. I just think to watch the mood on, say, like our message board, because obviously we keep tabs and post the different offers that Mertz was getting, and I think it was it's kind of natural for people to wonder if the Badgers would be able to hold on to him, considering that he was getting so much attention from schools that you would consider to be more players for national recruits compared to the Badgers, at least in seasons past. And so I think to hold on to him in particular, but then also to hold on to Brown and really the rest of these other 4-star guys that are in this class. I mean, I think that says a lot about the relationship and the fit that they found with these players, and I think that bodes well for getting their college careers started off on the right foot when they get onto campus.
Right. And you mentioned Graham Mertz, and I don't want to call it a soap opera, but it was kind of must-see TV,
really
when he was picking up those offers, Alabama, Georgia, Stanford, Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, list kind of goes on and on and on. And he was on this very upfront with the Wisconsin coaching staff, and about posting that stuff, and he was in close contact with John Budmeyer. So, I don't think it was anything that he was trying to do to draw extra attention to himself. I think that he handled his recruitment the way he wanted to, and being upfront with the coaching staff. I know the Wisconsin staff was fine with how he handled it, but Logan Brown was a little bit different, and the same schools were knocking down the door for him. And I got a chance to talk to his high school coach, quite a few times, I guess, since that camp that I talked about after his freshman year. And a lot of those schools came into East Kentwood High School, and they were inquiring about Logan Brown, and he was just kind of thanks but no thanks with them. So he didn't make a lot of his new offers public. He didn't make schools coming into the high school public. So two guys who were recruited very heavily, just kind of handled both different ways. But they're both heading to Wisconsin. They're both huge gets for that coaching staff. And like you mentioned, John, you talked about the relationships. Specifically with Brown, I think they got him on campus like 6 times before his commitment, and the relationship that he had with Joe Rudolph was huge. And Logan Brown's a big guy. When I talk to him, he wants to talk about stuff other than football, and I think the Wisconsin coaching staff realized that. So when he was there, it was not just a 24-hour visit that centered around football. It was getting to know him as a person, getting to know his family as a person, as people, I should say. And his sister was big in his recruitment. She was a Division I athlete, and they kind of won her over. So again, like you talked about, John, the relationship building that went on, I thought was big for this class. And getting a lot of those guys locked up early, they built the bond together. So a lot of good stuff, and it's a big reason why this is probably going to be Wisconsin's best. I shouldn't say best. I should say most highly rated class of the internet era, of the Rivals.com era, which dates back to 2002.
So obviously, Brown and Mertz, for good reason, kind of get a lot of the headlines, and it's easy to talk about them because they're up at the top of our rankings for Rivals.com ratings and all that stuff. But the Badgers are signing, or set to sign 4 other 4-star players according to our ranking system in tight end Hayden Rucci, defensive back Samar Melvin, linebacker Spencer Lytle, and defensive tackle Rodis Johnson. Not to solo out one over the other, because it's big for the Badgers to sign a big crop of 4-star players like this. But is there one of that group of 4 that stands out to you as somebody that was a particularly big get for this class for UW?
Yeah, Rodis Johnson, just because of his position, I thought was a huge get at the time that they got him. They had Keanu Benton and they had Gio Paez, 2 guys that they were very high on. So they had commitments from them at the time of his Rodis Johnson's commitment. But I just think that, what he can bring to Wisconsin at a position that, I don't want to say they haven't recruited well, but, they haven't gotten big time 4-star defensive tackles very often in the last, 18 years, dates back to 2002. So, I thought his commitment was huge. And, like you talked about, John, I went back and kind of looked at past recruiting classes, and, with Rodis Johnson, he's tied for second as the most highly rated defensive tackle that Wisconsin has signed. I fully expect him to sign tomorrow. So, Nick Hayden's was the top one. He's a 4-star kid with a 5.9 rating, but Rodis Johnson joins a group that includes Brandon Hoy, Jordan Cahoot, and Garrett Rand as highly rated defensive tackles that Wisconsin's been able to land. So, because it's a position of need, and with the way the defensive line struggled, in terms of inconsistency and injuries and everything that went into it, I thought Rodis Johnson was a huge get for the Badgers in this 2019 class.
Yeah, and I think that obviously you sign these guys, and it's not like the NFL draft or anything where you expect them all to come in and contribute right away. But you kind of see, you take a look at Wisconsin's season this year, and you can see what happens when you develop kind of a depth chart hole at a position, like the Badgers had kind of with defensive line, defensive end in particular. Obviously some injuries played a role with that, specifically with Garrett Rand, who you mentioned a minute ago with his Achilles injury that held him out for this year. But I think that's a position that they really needed to add some big bodies to, guys. And I think the thing that stands out about Johnson to me is that he seems like the kind of guy that could flex, and depending on how he develops, could play either at that nose spot or at that defensive end position, which in the scheme that the Badgers run, the 3-4, it's a demanding position that not a lot of athletes fit the mold for, and so I think that's the thing that stands out to me about him, is that not only are you bolstering a position group that we've seen what happens when you run a little thin, but to have somebody who could conceivably kind of play both spots, I think that's in particular, I think that's a pretty big get for UW.
Right, and you look at his film, and he's a little bit raw because he grew up playing on the offensive line. He's about 6'4", 285 pounds, but a big wingspan if you look at his tape. So like you said, John, a guy that they pencil in at defensive tackle, but I think he could bump out to end. When they run two defensive linemen down, I think he fits well there. So he gives you a little bit of everything there, and I think versatility is definitely something that Rodis Johnson is going to bring to the table. How quickly can he contribute? Again, I think there's going to be a learning curve there, but the tools are there, and he was a top target for Wisconsin, from the very start of this 2019 class. So he'll certainly be one of the most interesting guys to watch, during fall camp, and maybe he starts to emerge in the 2020 season beyond that.
Yeah, and he's another guy that you could conceivably think of, or really any of these the defensive linemen. I think for one thing, there's going to be a path to some playing time, depending on how the Badgers kind of look at their position next year. Obviously, they'll be bringing back Bryson Williams, who is got some work there after Olive Sangapolu missed the final part of the season with his arm injury. But from a scholarship standpoint, they'll be kind of missing out on some depth at that nose spot. So it'll definitely be an opportunity for somebody to kind of emerge in fall camp, and also having the red shirt rule where you could play a couple of games and then still keep your red shirt. I think that's probably a big deal for the Badgers at that position in particular as they go into next year. But we had something else up on the site that we usually do for this signing day, just kind of running through some superlatives and guys that we think stand out in this class one way or another. We both talked about the top prospect, touched a little bit on the defensive line as an area that somebody could play early. Is there anybody else in this class that jumps out to you as somebody who could see the field almost as early as next year in like a more extensive role, say, than just like the 4 games to maintain the red shirt?
Yeah, and that's it's funny you brought that up. That was the question I had the most difficult time with. If you look at that series that we've been doing for quite a while, we look at top prospect, most likely to play early, the sleeper, most needed, best surprise, most underrated. But looking at that most likely to play early, usually there's someone from that recruiting class where you say, okay, this guy's going to play early because they have a hole at that position, and he's going to be relied upon. Whether it be long snapper and a guy like Adam Bay, or junior college guy like Andrew Van Ginkel in years past, where you said, okay, this guy's going to play right away. Looking at this group, I think it's a credit to the roster that they have right now, where there aren't any glaring holes where you could say, okay, this guy's going to for sure come in. I think all three defensive linemen have a chance with Gio Paez, Keanu Benton, and Rodis Johnson. Like you said, John, they're looking for probably a backup defensive tackle / nose guard. Benton or Rodis Johnson, maybe they'll be there. Paez is another guy who could bump around, either play nose tackle or end. But just looking at the combination of a skill set and being ready to play, I think Leo Chenal fits that bill pretty well as a guy that I think at bare minimum probably participates on special teams right away. Just looking at his senior film and then seeing some pictures of him, when he was on campus, physically he looks like he's ready to play right away, just like his brother did, John Chenal, the walk-on fullback who burned his red shirt as a true freshman this fall playing on special teams. So, about 6'3", 235 pounds. Leo Chenal is going to transform his body, from a year or two in Wisconsin strength and conditioning program. He's coming in looking, awfully fit, awfully ready, just by an eyeball test, like he can play right away. So I think he plays on special teams as a true freshman and burns his red shirt.
Yeah, and I think there's at least some history of the Badgers liking when you have like a linebacker who comes in and is able to physically handle the workload of playing college football right away. I think just the positional instincts and the knack for the game that some of those guys have, it helps them get on the field a little bit earlier. I was thinking about thinking back to last year's recruiting class, and doesn't surprise me that somebody like Jack Sanborn was able to kind of pick up the game, and he played obviously a little bit more on defense than I think what you're talking about for Leo Chenal, but certainly wouldn't be unprecedented to see somebody like that work their way into at least a special teams role, if not maybe as a backup or something like that. Is there anybody in this class that you want to highlight as a sleeper, like somebody that maybe people kind of overlook when they're going through this class? I mean, it's easy to focus on the cream of the crop, up at the top, according to at least the rival star rankings and all that stuff. But what do you think is getting underrated, or somebody that people shouldn't forget about when they sign this class?
Yeah, we talked about Gio Paez a little bit. I think there's a handful of guys that could kind of fit that bill, but I'd look at Joe Tippmann, probably projected offensive guard in this class. He was, I wrote about kind of a tier one guy in the eyes of the Wisconsin coaching staff, where he was one of the top offensive linemen that they targeted in this class. And Logan Brown has got the bulk of that attention from the duo that they have right now, who are expected to sign from the offensive line group. But Joe Tippmann, I think he had a great senior season. I think he led his team to a state championship in Indiana. But a guy that's not getting talked about enough, I think, and probably after a redshirt year, it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do as an interior lineman for the Badgers. I don't think he's getting talked enough about because rightfully so. A guy like Logan Brown received a lot of that attention, but I think Joe Tippmann is up there too, and he's a big time offensive lineman that they're bringing in, and someone that I know that coaching staff has high expectations for.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the piece that was up on the website, I think you and somebody else mentioned Samar Melvin. I mean, I know that it's hard to say that a 4-star player would be an underrated or a sleeper, but I think from watching the defense this year, the team that's currently on campus, the Badgers really weren't afraid to, and I guess when I say the Badgers, I should say defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard really was not afraid to break guys into those spots that they had open that were still kind of fluid at corner and slot corner and that kind of thing. And so, at the end of the season, I don't know that you could really say that the Badgers had really established anybody as like a tier one starter, somebody that was clearly head and shoulders better than the rest of the guys that was obviously going to take that starting job and run with it from spring and fall camp on. And so I think it would not surprise me to see somebody like Samar Melvin or James Williams, another DB from Florida. Just we've seen that the Badgers are not afraid to play younger guys if they feel like they can handle it. And so just from not seeing anybody really kind of take a stranglehold on those jobs would not, I guess, I'm not going to say that it's going to happen, but I'm not going to rule it out that a true freshman comes in and, competes for, some serious playing time there too.
Yeah. I think it's a wide open group, a wide open position room right now. And, they're adding 3 guys to that mix too. So, it's one of the youngest, I don't want to say deepest, because I think we got into trouble, this fall we called the wide receiver.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Hey, I'm as guilty as anyone, trust me. So I don't want to call this group deep yet. I'll just call them. There's a bunch of young guys there.
Yeah, that's totally fair, I think.
So again, I don't think he would hesitate to play Samar Melvin or James Williams or even a guy like Dean Ingram if he. When I say he, I mean Jim Leonard. If he feels that they're ready. Again, I think you'll go into spring camp with a wide open competition there. Some guys with experience, some others with less experience, and this fall it'll get even more interesting with 3 more guys added to the mix. So I'll say it's a young position with a lot of guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the fall.
Okay. Let's see. So we kind of run through some other stuff here that we didn't touch on. Why don't we say, or why don't we talk about the best surprise of this class? Like, who stood out to you as somebody that I guess what did you think about for this category, and who did you pick?
Yeah, I went with Cameron Phillips, who is actually going to be a preferred walk-on, who's going to enroll early at Wisconsin. I remember writing about Phillips quite often at the beginning of this class, this 2019 class, in terms of the Sweet 16s that we do and the position outlooks that we do. He was, one of Wisconsin's top, 2, 3, 4, 5 receivers that they had on the board, right away in this 2019 class. And, they got him on campus, I think twice, most recently last fall. So the fall of 2017. And then he transferred from his high school in Ohio to IMG Academy in Florida, which is a football powerhouse, tons and tons of Division I guys each year. But he was hurt his entire year, so he didn't play as a senior. And then, I would say it's out of the blue because, I saw some activity on the day that he committed. I thought, something was about to happen. But he just kind of resurfaced out of the blue, and he announced that he committed to Wisconsin. And, it wasn't after an official visit or anything like that. So it was a situation where the coaching staff kept tabs on him, and he kind of reevaluated things after his injury in terms of what schools had pulled out of the picture and what scholarships he had and didn't have. So it was a surprise to me when he committed to the Badgers, just because we hadn't heard his name linked to Wisconsin for so long. So getting him as a preferred walk-on is pretty huge for Wisconsin, because he's a 3-star kid, injury or not. And at the start of the 2019 cycle, we actually had him as a 4-star kid. So I think he's going to be a guy that comes into this spring with a chip on his shoulder, someone who's looking to earn a scholarship, and someone who's looking to say, hey, look, I'm just as good as I was when I was a junior in high school, where, a lot of schools across the country made me a top priority. So he was my biggest surprise, my biggest, pleasant surprise in this 2019 class.
Sure. And then I think we should close up by talking about the kind of last pieces of the puzzle that the Badgers added 2 commitments in the month of December here as we get closer to the actual early signing period, and Quan Easterling and then Titus Toller, both of them committed a little over a week ago for Easterling, and then Toller was on the 14th last Friday. So what are the Badgers getting in those guys? How do they fit into this class? And I guess what should people know about them, since they kind of came into the fold a little bit, later in the overall recruiting picture here?
Yeah, Easterling is a scholarship fullback, which you don't see very often. If you look at guys in the past, Alec Ingold came as a linebacker, and Derek Watt came as a linebacker, and Austin Ramish came as a tailback, potentially a linebacker, and he moved to fullback. So it's not a position that they often go and allocate a scholarship to. But looking at Quan Easterling's senior tape, they kind of felt that he was someone, because they locked up a lot of their needs, that they could add a luxury guy like him to this 2019 class. They flipped him from Akron. Wisconsin offered this fall, and he was also receiving pretty strong interest from UCLA. So he'll be that lead blocker for Julius Davis in this 2019 class. And then Titus Toller, the more that you watch his film, the more you hear about him. I think the more you think that Titus Toller was a huge late addition for Wisconsin this 2019 class. He's not as rated as highly as I think he should be. We have him as a 3-star right now, I think a 5.6, but he plays at that powerhouse, St. John Bosco out in California, the same high school as Spencer Lytle. And again, you look at his senior tape, he's a violent safety. He runs pretty well. You talk about playing downhill. That's certainly what he looks like on his film. He's a guy too that, physically he looks like he might be able to play as a true freshman. He's not someone that needs to add 15 or 20 pounds to play in the defensive backfield. So an awfully good get. And, just last night, which was Monday night, USC came in with an offer to Toller. But we've been told that there's no worry on Wisconsin's end. They expect him to sign tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So, Quan Easterling, I don't know how excited you'll get about a fullback, but, pop on his senior tape. There's a lot to like there. But Titus Toller, we could be talking in 2, 3, 4 years that, Toller was one of the better kids that Wisconsin signed in this class. There's a lot of safeties on the roster right now, a lot of guys that are unproven. And it'll be really interesting to see what Toller can bring to the mix. A guy that, when Jim Leonard and Bobby April were recruiting him, when they got him on campus, they said, we want you to play like Dakota Dixon. So he's got, pretty big shoes to fill, but I think he's ultra talented, and I think he plays sooner rather than later.
All right. Well, that should pretty much take us right through the Wisconsin's signing day class of 2019. And before we dive right into the 2020 class, which is obviously headlined by a couple of in-state guys, and specifically on the offensive line, John, I hope you take a little break from the recruiting digest and just detox a little bit before we dive right into 2020. All right.
Detox is a great word. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the BadgerBlitz.com podcast. We will try and come back with another show either before, or I would say maybe right after the Badgers play in their next football game as they close out their 2018 season in the New Era Pinstripe Bowl against Miami on the December 27th, which is actually this coming, not this Thursday, but the next Thursday. So we will come back with a show right around that time. Thanks again for listening to the BadgerBlitz.com podcast, and we will talk to you next time.